Amen.
Good morning. Good morning. So as Emily pointed out just a few moments ago, we did start here at the same time in Summit, and that's one of the many wonderful connections that I feel to Beacon in this community. And the reason I think that's important is that she and I know what a blessing it is to feel a warm welcome in a new community. And that is not something that we should ever take for granted. And so I'd like to share with you a story of another newcomer. It's the story of a man who got arrested in his home country for selling liquor, for selling alcohol, without paying enough taxes on those sales. The charges were probably exaggerated in order to get him to pay off some official, but there he was in jail. So his family bailed him out and immediately snuck him out of town and sent him to America. Once here, he started working, but it took him 5 years to get enough money saved up to bring the rest of his family here. Included in that family was a son who had been born a few months after his departure, so he didn't see live and in person until that boy was over 5 years old. Another son and a daughter. Within a year, another son was born to this family, the first American citizen in the family. So there were now 3 boys and a girl. All 3 of these boys served in the U.S. Armed Forces. 3 of the 4 children received college degrees, 2 of them graduate degrees. And that baby boy, the first American citizen, grew up to serve as a judge in a state court for over 30 years. I know this story because that baby boy was also my father. And it was his father who jumped bail in Poland in order to come to this country. I could tell a slightly different, slightly less dramatic story on my mother's side. But the point is, we all have immigration stories, unless we count ourselves among Native Americans. The challenge, of course, is to remember those immigration stories decades and decades after they happened. Just a few moments ago, we read the famous poem by Emma Lazarus, and that is exactly what she did. Emma Lazarus was born in 1849, and she wrote The New Colossus in 1883. But her family came to this country in the 1750s. She traced her lineage back to a group of Western European Jews. And so, when she lived, there was a wave of Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe, and she saw the rise of anti-Semitism and all of the animus that they faced as they tried to make their way in this country that had been so good to her and her family. And so in her later years, after that poem, she wrote about the rise of anti-Semitism and the rights of Russian immigrants. It was at about that time that an organization was established called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society. It was established in 1881, 2 years before Emma Lazarus wrote The Great Colossus. And it was established by Jews of mostly German descent who had lived in New York for a while and who wanted to help those Jews from Russia who were having such a difficult time once they got to this country. It's hard to find a Jewish family today that doesn't have a HIAS story. HIAS helped virtually every Jew who came to this country. However, since the early 2000s, when Jewish immigration to this country really waned, after the fall of the Soviet Union, most of the Jews who lived under oppression there were able to get where they wanted to go. And today, most Jews who are leaving their home country, their #1 destination is Israel and not the United States. So since the early 2000s, HIAS has redirected its efforts to help refugees from other countries, and not necessarily Jews. They have gotten involved in the aftermath of conflicts from Afghanistan, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Ethiopia, Haiti, Hungary, Iran, Morocco, I can keep going, Poland, Romania, Tunisia, Vietnam, as well as the successor states of the Soviet Union. And the reason that the Jewish community does this is because we remember our stories. And not just the story of my family or Emma Lazarus's story, but our entire collective history. I was involved in Bible study with some members of my community, and we were really talking about the whole book of the Bible. And the truth is, it is a story of journeys. From the very beginning, it is the journey out of the Garden of Eden into the rest of the world. Abraham leaving his homeland and finding a new home. Jacob having to leave that place and going back to where Abraham was from. Then there's Moses, who left Egypt, the only land he ever knew, to go find his destiny and his partner, and then coming back to bring the Israelites on a similar journey with him. It is a story of journeys, and that is why I asked Emily to include the traveler's prayer, because the truth is we are all travelers, and we are all the descendants of travelers. And when we forget that, we look at people who are traveling a little bit differently. So as we look at the Hebrew Bible from a Jewish perspective, we are challenged to be God's instruments. And so I turn to a passage from the book of Exodus, which gave rise to the title for my little talk here this morning. So first of all, it begins with someone that you may know and not like. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. You don't have to like someone to act kindly and justly on their behalf. But then it goes on. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings, you know the heart of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. This is a curious phrase. You know the heart of the stranger. The Hebrew word for heart is lev, which we still translate as that organ that pumps blood in our bodies. But it's interesting, in the ancient world, the heart was not the seat of emotion the way we know it, right? I heart New York, or I heart you. In the ancient world, the heart was seen as the seat of intellect. In other words, we know the thought process of the newcomer, of the stranger, right? You'll hear people say, oh, why did they put their children at risk? They knew that they might get separated, right? We've all heard those arguments being made. Well, we know the thought process that drives someone to leave a horrible place and take risks, even with their most precious possession, their children, because they know they cannot stay where they are. And that is courage. That is not stupidity, right? That is weighing the potential consequences and choosing the path that has the potential to improve your life. That is what travelers have always done. Now, this stuff is easy when it's someone you know, right? We all stand up for our family, right? My grandmother, who, if she were to come to this country today, might be separated from her children, she was a brave woman, and I can see her that way. But when it's someone we don't know, who speaks a different language than we do, who looks different than we do, who doesn't have someone to stand up for them, that's when it's really hard, but even more important. Another text from the Hebrew Bible is from the book of Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah is an interesting character. He lived through the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple the first time in about the year 586 BCE. And he watched his fellow countrymen become refugees. And this is what he wrote. Do what is just and right. Rescue from the defrauder him who is robbed. Do not wrong the stranger. Do not wrong the fatherless and the widow. Commit no lawless act. And do not shed the blood of the innocent in this place. At the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Doing what is right and doing what is just? The texts that I've quoted so far come from the Hebrew Bible, which, as I've said, is the foundational text of the Jewish people. But the truth is that we live our lives as Jews according to rabbinic texts, post-biblical texts. And so I'd like to share with you an important teaching from the Talmud, the main rabbinic text which really gave rise to rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that we know today. And I think you'll see why it's so important to this conversation. If a person resides in a town 30 days, he becomes responsible for contributing to the soup kitchen. 3 months to the charity box, 6 months to the clothing fund, 9 months to the burial fund, and 12 months for contributing to the repair of the town walls. In other words, when we welcome the stranger, it's not just a selfless act, it's not an act of kindness. When we welcome strangers into our community, we are ultimately welcoming in people who can contribute to our community and share the burden of maintaining it. And who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want more people contributing and making it easier to live together? So as we engage in this ongoing conversation on immigration, we all need to remember our own personal histories, even if they took place 75 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We all need to remember that the American ideal is a plant full of different and happy kinds of peas, right? Remember our story. And let's remember that we have an obligation to be kind to those who are on a journey, because the truth is, we are still on a journey ourselves. Now, I know that Beacon already knows this, that Beacon is already engaged in this process and in this conversation. But now, please know, if you did not already, that you have partners in the community. Shalom.
So travelers, we sing again. And we sing about the place that we are headed.